Part 1. If this video showed up for you, it's because this story is going to move you and give you chills. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of story, and comment which city you're watching from. The sky over the majestic Oakwood Cemetery was a bruised purple, heavy with rain that hadn't quite decided to fall yet. The air smelled of wet earth, lilies, and the sharp, metallic tang of impending sorrow. A small white coffin, far too small for anyone's liking, sat perched above the dark, gaping mouth of a fresh grave. Inside lay 7-year-old Ethan, a boy whose laughter used to chase the pigeons in the park, now silenced by a hit-and-run that had left the entire community hollowed out. Officer Ryan stood at the perimeter, the leather leash wrapped tight around his gloved hand. Beside him sat Ace, a German shepherd with a coat like polished onyx and eyes that usually held a calm, disciplined intelligence. But today, Ace was different. The dog's body was vibrating, a low, anxious whine trapped in his throat. Ryan reached down, stroking the velvet fur behind Ace's ears. "Steady, boy," he whispered, his breath clouding in the cold air. "I know, it's a sad day." Ryan and Ace were inseparable, a single entity with two hearts. They had tracked missing hikers through blizzards and taken down armed felons in alleyways. Ryan knew every twitch of Ace's tail, every shift in his gait. But he had never seen the dog like this. Ace wasn't grieving, he was hunting. His ears swiveled like radar dishes, tuning out the weeping mother, Sarah, and focusing intently on the coffin. The priest's voice droned on about angels and peace, but the atmosphere was shattered when Officer Michael Davis stepped forward to place a flower on the casket. Davis was the first responder who had found Ethan's body. He looked somber, his head bowed, but as he neared the white box, Ace snapped. With a strength that nearly dislocated Ryan's shoulder, the dog lunged. The leash burned through Ryan's palm as Ace broke free, galloping across the manicured grass. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the crowd. "Ace, no!" Ryan shouted, sprinting after him. But it was too late. Ace didn't attack the people. He leapt, his paws scrambling for traction, and vaulted onto the lowering device, positioning himself directly over the coffin. He didn't howl, he didn't whine. He planted his feet, lowered his head, and let out a growl that vibrated through the soles of everyone's shoes. It wasn't a sound of sadness. It was a warning. Officer Davis froze, his hand halfway to the casket. Ace's eyes were locked on him, pupils dilated, teeth bared in a snarl of pure primal aggression. The dog wasn't protecting the dead. He was guarding something precious from a threat. "Get that animal under control," Davis yelled, his voice cracking, stumbling back as if physically pushed. "He's desecrating the grave." Ryan reached the gravesite, grabbing Ace's collar. "Ace, heel!" But the dog refused to move. He was a statue of fury, his gaze fixed solely on Davis. He had to use his whole body weight to drag the canine away. As he wrestled the dog away, Ryan looked up and caught Davis's eye. There was fear there, yes. But beneath the fear, Ryan saw something else, something sharp and guilty, that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Everyone assumed it was grief driving the dog mad. Everyone except Ryan. He knew Ace didn't react to ghosts. He reacted to predators. And he had just identified one. That night, the rain finally came, hammering against the roof of Ryan's small patrol car. He sat in the driveway, the engine idling. Ace was in the back, calm now, but his eyes were open, watching the rearview mirror. Ryan couldn't go inside. The scene at the cemetery played on a loop in his mind.
Why Davis? Why the coffin? Ryan pulled the case file from his bag. Incident report number 4092. Victim, Ethan Miller. Cause of death, blunt force trauma consistent with high-speed vehicle impact. Reporting officer, Michael Davis. It was clean. Too clean. No skid marks recorded. No witnesses. Just a boy found on the side of a lonely road and a cop who happened to be on patrol nearby. Ryan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. If Ace was right, and Ace was always right, Davis wasn't just a witness. Driven by an instinct he couldn't explain, Ryan put the car in gear. "Let's go for a ride, buddy," he muttered. They arrived at the scene of the accident. The road was slick and black under the streetlights. Ryan let Ace out. "Search," he commanded softly. Ace didn't go to the road where the blood had been washed away. He put his nose to the wind and trotted toward the tree line, past the yellow police tape that fluttered like a ghost in the wind. Ryan followed, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Ace stopped at the edge of a dense thicket of bushes, about 50 yards from the road, and sat down. He barked once, sharp, urgent. Ryan knelt. Tucked deep inside the thorny underbrush, half buried in mud, was a small, rectangular object, a trail camera. It belonged to the hunting club that owned the adjacent land, something the initial investigation had completely missed or ignored. Ryan's heart hammered against his ribs as he pried the SD card out with trembling fingers. He rushed back to the cruiser, inserting the card into his laptop. The screen flickered to life, graining and black and white. The timestamp matched the night of the accident. Ryan watched, holding his breath. He saw a small figure walking on the shoulder of the road. Ethan. Then a car approached. It didn't swerve, it didn't speed up. It slowed down. A dark sedan. It stopped right next to the boy. The door opened. A man stepped out. It was Officer Davis. Ryan squinted at the screen. This wasn't an accident. Davis was talking to the boy. Then, suddenly, Davis lunged. He grabbed Ethan. The boy struggled, kicking his legs, but he was tiny compared to the officer. Davis dragged him toward the back of the car, and then the video cut to static. Ryan slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small car. His breath came in ragged gasps. This wasn't a hit and run. This was a setup. And Ace knew. Ace had smelled the lie on Davis's uniform. But as Ryan reached for his radio to call it in, he paused. If Davis was bold enough to do this, he wasn't working alone. A patrol officer doesn't stage a murder without cover. Ryan looked at Ace in the rearview mirror. "We're on our own, pal." But they had no idea how deep the rot went.
Ryan's hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the rage boiling in his veins. He killed the headlights and let the cruiser drift into the shadow of an old, abandoned municipal maintenance yard about a mile from the crime scene. The trail camera footage had ended with the car driving off in this direction, and Ace was already pawing at the window, a low, guttural sound vibrating in his chest. The dog knew. He had the scent of betrayal in his nostrils. They exited the car into the pouring rain. The yard was a graveyard of rusted machinery and overgrown weeds. In the center stood a corrugated metal shed, its door hanging slightly off its hinges. Ace didn't hesitate. He bolted toward the structure, splashing through puddles that looked like pools of black ink. Ryan followed, hand on his holster, the silence of the night feeling heavy, like the calm before a devastating storm. Inside, the shed smelled of stale oil and something else, something familiar. Ace bypassed the junk piles and went straight to a loose floorboard in the corner. He began to dig, his claws shredding the rotten wood. Ryan knelt beside him, shining his flashlight into the hole. There, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was a torn piece of a blue t-shirt. Ryan's breath hitched. It was the shirt Ethan had been wearing in the missing person photos. But it wasn't just the shirt. Tangled in the fabric was a small golden object that caught the beam of the flashlight. Ryan picked it up. It was a lapel pin, a golden eagle with outstretched wings. The air left Ryan's lungs. This wasn't a standard-issue pin. It was a command staff commendation. Specifically, the kind worn by Assistant Chief Thomas Vance, the man who ran the department, the man who had stood at the podium during the funeral service that morning, wiping away a fake tear while talking about community loss. The realization hit Ryan like a physical blow. Davis was just the muscle. Vance was the architect. Suddenly, the sound of tires crushing gravel outside froze Ryan in place. Headlights swept across the dusty windows of the shed, blinding him for a second. A car door slammed, then another. "I told you to burn it, you idiot." I thought I did. I must have dropped it when I was moving the kid's stuff," Davis' voice replied, shaky and terrified. Ryan clicked off his flashlight and shrank back into the shadows, his hand clamping gently over Ace's muzzle. The dog was tense, a coiled spring ready to snap. The shed door creaked open, and two silhouettes stepped into the gloom. "Find it," Vance ordered, his voice cold and devoid of humanity. "If anyone links me to that brat's accident, I'm not going down alone, Davis. I did what had to be done. His mother thought she could ruin my career with her little harassment lawsuit. I showed her what real loss feels like." The confession hung in the damp air, cruel and absolute. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. Ryan felt a fire ignite in his chest. He stepped out from the shadows, his weapon drawn. "Hands in the air, now!" Both men spun around. Davis looked like he was about to faint, but Vance's face twisted into a sneer. He didn't raise his hands. Instead, his hand drifted toward his waist. "Assistant Chief Rance, you're making a mistake. Nobody cares about one kid from the project. Walk away and you make detective by Monday." I said, "Hands up." Vance drew. "Ace, Fuss!"
The command was barely out of Ryan's mouth before the black blur of the German Shepherd launched through the air. Ace hit Vance in the chest with the force of a freight train, his jaws locking onto the chief's gun arm. The weapon clattered to the floor as Vance screamed, a sound of pure terror. Davis fumbled for his gun, but Ryan was already there. He tackled the younger officer, slamming him into the rusted wall. The fight was short and brutal. Within seconds, Davis was cuffed and pinned to the ground. Ryan stood up, chest heaving, aiming his weapon at Vance, who was writhing on the floor with Ace standing over him, growling inches from his throat. "It's over, Vance," Ryan spat. "You're done." He keyed his radio, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Dispatch, this is Officer Ryan. I need backup at the old municipal yard. I have 2 suspects in custody for the murder of Ethan Miller. And send the damn FBI." As the sirens began to wail in the distance, piercing the night, Ryan looked down at Ace. The dog wasn't celebrating. He wasn't calm. Ace had released Vance's arm, but was now pacing frantically, looking back toward the door, then at Ryan, then at the door again. He let out a high-pitched yip, spinning in circles. "What is it, boy?" Ryan asked, wiping rain and sweat from his eyes. "We got them. It's over." But Ace didn't stop. He ran to the door, looked back at Ryan, and barked. It wasn't an aggression bark. It was the specific rhythmic bark he used when he found a survivor in the rubble. The survivor bark. A chill colder than the rain shot down Ryan's spine. He thought back to the funeral. Ace growling at the coffin, not in sadness, not in anger at the dead. He was growling because he sensed something wrong with the state of the body. "Oh my God," Ryan whispered. He grabbed the radio again. "Dispatch, send an ambulance to the funeral home, now. Do not let them bury that boy. Repeat, do not let them bury the boy." Ryan didn't wait for a confirmation. He dragged the groaning Vance and the weeping Davis to a pipe, handcuffed them together, and sprinted for his cruiser. Ace was already inside, barking at the windshield. They tore out of the lot, sirens screaming, racing against a clock Ryan hadn't known was ticking. The speedometer climbed past 90. If Ace was right, and Ace was always right, the most terrifying part of this night wasn't the murder plot. It was that the murder hadn't worked. Yet.
Ryan kicked the doors of the county morgue open with enough force to crack the safety glass. The coroner, a tired man named Dr. Evans, dropped his clipboard in shock. The room was freezing, filled with the smell of formaldehyde and silence. Ethan's small body lay on a stainless steel table, covered by a white sheet, ready for the final transport back to the cemetery. "Get away from him!" Ryan shouted, rushing to the table. "Officer Ryan, have you lost your mind?" Evans stammered, reaching for the phone. "The boy is deceased! You can't be in here with a dog!" But Ace wasn't listening. He didn't bark this time. He whimpered, a sound so full of desperate hope that it broke the sterile coldness of the room. He stood on his hind legs, placing his front paws gently on the edge of the steel table, and licked the boy's pale, cold hand. "Check a pulse," Ryan commanded, his chest heaving. "Now!" "Ryan, he's been dead for 48 hours! The autopsy was waived because of the obvious crash injuries. But check him!" Ryan roared, his hand hovering over his holster, his eyes wild. Terrified, Dr. Evans pressed 2 fingers against the carotid artery. He shook his head, sighing. "There's nothing, Ryan. It's just—" "Riger!" Suddenly, Evans stopped. His eyes widened behind his glasses. He pressed harder. The room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigeration units. "My God," Evans whispered, his face draining of color. "Get a crash cart, now!" The next hour was a blur of chaos. Doctors and nurses swarmed the room, pushing Ryan and Ace into the hallway. The doors swung shut, but through the small window, Ryan watched as they cut the boy's clothes and attached electrodes. A doctor rushed out, looking bewildered. It's impossible, but he's alive! Barely! It's a rare phenomenon. Severe oxygen deprivation caused his metabolic rate to drop so low it mimicked rigor mortis. He wasn't dead. He was in hibernation. If you hadn't come back—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. 3 days later, the sun was shining, casting warm, golden squares of light onto the floor of the ICU room. The steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the most beautiful song Ryan had ever heard. Sarah, Ethan's mother, was asleep in a chair, holding her son's hand, her face finally peaceful after days of terror. Ryan stood by the door, watching. Beside him sat Ace, his ears perked up, his tail giving a slow, gentle thump against the floor. Ethan stirred. Sarah woke instantly. "Ethan, baby!" The boy's eyelids fluttered. They were heavy, fighting against the exhaustion of a near-death experience. Slowly, they opened. His eyes were unfocused at first, scanning the white ceiling, the tubes, his mother's face. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. Then he saw him. Sitting stoically by the bed, Ace let out a soft woof. Ethan's eyes locked onto the dog. A faint smile, weak but genuine, touched his lips. He moved his hand, fingers twitching, reaching out over the edge of the bed. Ace immediately stood up and pressed his wet nose into the boy's palm. "Ace!" Ethan whispered, his voice no more than a scratchy breath. "You came back!" It wasn't the doctors who had pulled him back from the darkness. It wasn't the medicine. It was the sound of a growl at his coffin. It was the promise of a friend who refused to say goodbye. In the weeks that followed, the city was turned upside down. The arrest of Assistant Chief Vance and Officer Davis dominated the news. They were charged with conspiracy, attempted murder, and corruption. Vance's reign of terror was over, dismantled by a single loose thread he hadn't bothered to cut: a dog's loyalty. Ethan made a full recovery.
The brain damage everyone feared never materialized. It was as if his body had simply paused, waiting to be saved. On the day Ethan was discharged, a crowd gathered outside the hospital. But the boy didn't care about the cameras or the reporters. He walked out holding his mother's hand with one hand and burying his other hand deep into the thick black fur of the dog walking beside him. Ryan watched them get into the car. He knelt down and looked Ace in the eye. "You did good, partner. You did good." Ace licked Ryan's face, then looked back at Ethan. His job wasn't done. It never would be. The world is full of monsters who hide behind smiles and badges, people who think power gives them the right to decide who lives and who dies. They think they can bury the truth, but they always forget one thing. The truth has a scent, and there are those among us who will track it to the ends of the earth, not for glory and not for money, because love is the only force stronger than death.